The Empire ignored the warning. It was certain the humans were bluffing. 200 days later, it begged them to come. The Vasythar Ascendancy had not lost a system in 900 years. It kept that number the way lesser powers kept banners. 900 years, no world surrendered, no border pulled back, no order taken back once it was given. The Ascendancy governed 400 systems and 40 client species, and it governed them from ships. 9,000 warships, gray and blunt and patient, strung along the frontier like teeth in a jaw that had never once been made to close on anything harder than itself. The Ascendancy did not think of itself as cruel. It thought of itself as correct. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of this story. At the far edge of that frontier sat the Terran Reach, a single yellow star with 4 inhabited worlds and a ring of stations. And above the third world hung the largest shipyard the Ascendancy had ever built. Over Marshal Drawl stood at its high viewport and watched a war fleet being born. 60 new hulls in their cradles, welding light stitching the dark in slow blue seams. Below him, on the worlds and the stations, 11 million people lived and worked and slept, most of them building the ships that would one day let the Ascendancy add its 401st system to a list it had never had to correct. Drawl was not a cruel man either. He was a man with a deadline. The fleet was due at muster in 200 days, and Drawl had been told, more than once and by people who mattered, that he would deliver it on time or he would explain why in a room he did not want to stand in. So when the message came in from the Human Health Corps, flagged urgent, flagged again, flagged a third time in a way the Ascendancy's own officers were not permitted to flag anything, Drawl read the first line and felt the specific irritation of a busy man handed a problem by someone beneath him. The message was, everyone who saw it later agreed, the most courteous evacuation warning that had ever been filed in the history of the Reach. It thanked him for his time. It apologized for the intrusion. It asked with enormous politeness that 11 million people be moved off the inner worlds of a system he was responsible for. Within 200 days, on the strength of a number a human doctor had run on a star. Drawl set the message down. He looked back out at his fleet, and what he did not know, what nobody on his side had yet worked out, was that the number in that message was not a guess. It was a countdown, and it had already started. He called for his adjutant. He asked who had authorized the humans to send anything flagged that high. He was told, carefully, that the humans had authorized themselves, because the Health Corps answered to the Accord and not to him. Drawl did not like that answer. He filed the message under review, which in the Ascendancy meant a drawer, and he gave the order that would be quoted at his tribunal in language none of them had chosen yet. "Continue as planned," he said. "The star has stood for 1 billion years. It can wait for the fleet." Unmade was called the Marshal's Assembly, and it was built to make small men feel large, and large decisions feel small. Drawl sat at the head of a black stone table with 11 officers along its length, and a wall of screens behind him showing the Reach in cold survey colors. The star at the center of those screens was drawn in a soft, stable amber, and beside it was a line of text that read, "Stellar Class Stable, Assessment Current." What the screen did not say, what none of them read closely enough to notice, was the date beneath that assessment. The survey was 400 years old. It had been correct when it was made. It was correct no longer. And the difference between those two facts would be measured in people. The one officer who had read the date was Sub-Marshal Vesk, and Vesk was the kind of officer the Ascendancy produced by accident and then did not know what to do with. He was competent past the point of comfort. He asked the questions other officers had learned not to. He rose when Drawl opened the floor, and he did the most dangerous thing a subordinate can do in a room like that. He agreed with the enemy. "Over Marshal," he said, "the human data is not old. Ours is. Their instruments have watched this star for 60 years. Ours looked once, 4 centuries ago, and wrote down what it saw. He put the human report on the screens. He read the line the whole Reach would come to know by heart. The line a human doctor named Sana Iqbal had written and signed and staked her name on. "The star will flare within 200 days, Vesk read. "Everything inside the third orbit will cook. Move the people now or count them later." The room was quiet. Draw let it stay quiet because he had learned that silence made brave men reconsider. Then he asked the question that decides these things. "What does that mean for the muster?" he said. Vesk did not flinch. "It means we lose the yards over Marshall. It means we miss the deadline. It means we choose the 11 million over the 60 ships. That is the choice. There is no other choice hiding behind it." Draw looked at the amber star on the screen and found it looked exactly as it had that morning, which is to say, it looked like nothing at all. He thought about the room he would have to stand in if the fleet was late. He thought about a client species, a species of nurses and orderlies, telling the Ascendancy where its own star would burn. And he made the decision that everything after would be measured against. "Denied," he said. "The health corps will remain in its lane. It will treat the sick, and it will not move the well." He turned the words over once more, and then he said the phrase that would follow him to the end of his life. "The Ascendancy does not evacuate on the word of clients." Vesk sat down. He did not argue further, because arguing further was not survivable. And he was not a martyr. He was a sub-marshal with a family on the second world. But he did one thing before he left the assembly. He copied the human report to his own private file, with the date attached, and he wrote 3 words beneath it that no one would find until much later. She was right. The order went out that evening, sealed, final, in the language of an institution that had never once had to take an order back. And 200 days from the flare became 199, and nobody on the Blackstone table felt it move. Confidence, at its peak, does not look like arrogance. It looks like ordinary Tuesday work. In the weeks that followed the assembly, the Terran Reach did what it had always done. The yards ran 3 shifts. The stations traded and quarreled and grew. Children went to school on the second world under an amber sun that a human somewhere had promised them would try to kill them. And the promise was so quiet, filed so far down a chain of offices, that not one of those children ever heard it. On paper, everything was fine. In practice, in a plain gray room aboard a hospital ship parked at the cold edge of the system, a woman had stopped sleeping. But that comes later. First, the Empire had to be sure. Drawl ordered a census of the inner worlds, a head count to prove the population was calm, and the census officers went out with clipboards and confidence and came back with a single anomaly they could not explain. The human aid stations would not sign the safety attestation. Every Ascendancy office in the Reach had signed it, a simple form declaring the inner system secure and stable, no cause for concern. 39 client species signed. One did not. At an aid station on the 3rd station ring, a human corpsman named Danny Cho was handed the form and a pen and told to make his mark. He read it. He read it again. Then he set the pen down on the counter, very gently, the way a man sets down something he does not want to break. And he said he could not sign that the system was safe because his own corps had told him it was not, and he was not going to put his name on a lie about 11 million people. The census officer told him refusal would be logged. Cho said that was fine. Log it. He tore a strip of white medical tape from a roll, wrote a word on it in black marker, and pressed it to the edge of his station counter where the next shift would see it. The word was a name. It was the name of a patient he had lost that morning, an old woman with a bad heart, the first of many, though he did not know that yet. He did it the way a man does a small necessary thing, and then he went back to work. And when they asked him later, years later, why he had refused to sign, he looked at them like the question did not make sense, and he said someone had to be counting. The census officer filed the refusal and forgot it. Drawl never heard of it. And out past the fourth world, where the survey ships almost never went, the star did the thing the humans had said it would do first. It twitched. A patrol frigate on a long loop through the outer dark reported a wave of hard radiation. Brief, strange, gone before they could name it. 17 crew were in the exposed forward sections. All 17 were dead within the day, and the ship's own physicians, Vasythar physicians, good ones, could not stop it because Vasythar biology had evolved under a gentle sun and had never learned to repair that kind of damage. The report went up the chain marked equipment malfunction because that was the only box that fit. It reached Drawl's office as a line item, 17. He read it, frowned, and moved on, because 17 was a small number, and the muster was on schedule, and the star on his screen was still amber. What he did not know, what the report did not say, was that the number had already changed. By the time the ink was dry, it was no longer 17. By the end of that week, it was 23. By the end of the next, it was 31. And then a supply barge came home from the outer dark with its forward third gone silent, and it was 41. A relay tender had lost 6 in the open. A survey skiff had lost 8 when its shielding failed on a routine sweep. The barge lost 10 and limped in on half its drives. And each of those losses climbed the chain, and at each rung an officer did the quiet arithmetic of his own career and rounded the figure down and softened the word. 6 dead became a maintenance incident. 8 dead became an isolated equipment failure. 10 dead became elevated but localized attrition, consistent with frontier operations. By the time the tally reached the marshal's office, it was a single line of gray text with no faces in it at all. 41. Drawl read the line the way a busy man reads a line he has read before. He noted it, he did not act on it. The muster was on schedule, the yards were running 3 shifts, and 41, spread across 4 worlds in a fleet of 9,000 hulls, was not a crisis. It was a rounding error. That was the trouble with a number like 41. It was small enough to survive. And being small enough to survive was exactly what let it grow. Sub-Marshal Vesk did not round anything. In a locked file that only he opened, he kept the raw count, the real one, the one with the frigate crews and the skiff and the barge still in it. And beside each figure, he kept the date and the distance from the star. When he laid those figures out in a row, a shape appeared that no single report had ever shown. The losses were not scattered. They were marching inward, one orbit at a time, on the exact schedule a human doctor had put her name to 200 days out from the flare. Vesk looked at that shape for a long time and said nothing to anyone, because there was no one left to say it to. He had said it once, in the assembly, and been answered with a wall. So he did the only thing a careful man can do inside a wall. He kept moving freighters. There was one more attempt to make Drawl see it, and it came from inside his own house. The chief physician of the shipyard, an old Vasythar named Crest, who had spent his whole career keeping welders alive, requested 10 minutes of the overmarshal's time and used them the way a man trained to deliver bad news uses them, which is calmly, in order, without a single raised word. "Overmarshal," Crest said, "I have examined the crews we lost. The pattern is not equipment. Every death is radiation. The dose matches a stellar event, not a reactor fault, and the events are getting closer to the inner worlds." Drawl listened. He was not a man who refused to listen. When Crest finished, Drawl asked the only question that decided anything. "How many?" he asked. 41, Crest said. "And how many on the inner worlds?" Drawl asked. "None yet," Crest said. "Then bring me a number that has changed on the inner worlds," Drawl said, "and I will change the schedule for it. Until then, the schedule holds." It was, in its way, a reasonable thing to say. It was also the exact machinery of the disaster, because by the time the number on the inner worlds changed, it would not change by ones. It would change by millions. Crest went back to his infirmary and began, quietly, ordering more of everything and told no one why. Drawl, for his part, had begun to sleep badly, and he did not connect it to anything. He would tell himself afterward that he had felt nothing, that the first he knew of it was a flare, and that would not be true. On the 9th night after the barge came home, he stood at the high viewport of the shipyard station with a cup of the thin, bitter stimulant the Ascendancy served its officers. And he looked at the star the way a man looks at a thing he owns, and he found that it did not look the way it had. There was a color at its edge now, a hard white bloom around the amber, faint, the kind of thing a tired man could blame on a tired eye. Drawl blamed it on a tired eye. He finished the stimulant. He went to bed. He did not order anyone to look at the star, because ordering someone to look at the star meant admitting there was a reason to. And the Ascendancy does not evacuate on the word of clients. And a marshal who started jumping at the color of sunlight was a marshal who had already lost the room. He was right to have felt it. He would spend the rest of his life being right to have felt it. The pressure that mattered to Drawl did not come up from the frontier. It came down from the center. With 155 days left on the human count, a sealed message arrived from the office of the sovereign, and it did not mention the star, and it did not mention the humans, and it did not mention the 41 crew who were now a line of gray text in an archive. It mentioned the muster. The fleet was expected at the appointed system on the appointed day, and the message closed with a single sentence Drawl read standing up and did not sit down after. The Ascendancy is not late. That was all it said. 5 words, no name signed, the way the center always spoke, as if the words had assembled themselves. Drawl understood the message perfectly, because he had spent 40 years learning to read exactly this kind of message. It meant the 60 hulls in the yards were not 60 hulls. They were his career, his name, and the good opinion of the only people whose opinion the Ascendancy recognized. And every one of the 11 million people below him weighed, on that particular scale, precisely nothing. He did not think of it in those words. No one who does this ever thinks of it in those words. He thought of it as duty, and as schedule, and as the hard necessity of command. And he filed the human warning one drawer deeper and told his adjutant to hold the timeline. There was, in every institution that had never lost, a particular kind of officer, and the Reach had produced a fine specimen of him in a young flight captain named Rune. Captain Rune commanded a picket squadron on the inner ring, and Rune had read the same reports Drawl had read and drawn the opposite conclusion, which was that the problem was not the star, but the humans, who kept moving ships around the system for reasons that smelled to him like cowardice or worse. When one of Vesk's stage freighters passed through his patrol zone, empty, pressurized, filing a maintenance route that made no sense to a man who did not know what it was for, Rune did not query it up the chain. He boarded it. He impounded it. He put its human crew of 9 in a holding bay and filed a report calling it a smuggling interdiction. And he was, for about a day, extremely pleased with himself. The 9 human crew did not protest. That unsettled the guards more than protest would have. They sat in the holding bay, and after an hour, one of them, a woman with a corpsman's shears still clipped to her belt, asked the guard, politely, whether anyone on the station needed medical attention, because she had nothing else to do and might as well be useful. The guard said no. She nodded and went back to waiting. She did not know she was 150 days and 1 flare from being one of the 14,000 who would go into the fire. She only knew that a room full of people is a room full of people, and that you do not sit idle in one if you have hands. It is a small thing. It was the whole thing. The report reached Vesk first, because Vesk had flagged that freighter as his own, and Vesk went to Drawl before Rune's pride could turn into a diplomatic incident with the one client species the Reach could not afford to insult. "Over, Marshal," Vesk said. "One of my maintenance haulers has been seized by a picket captain who thinks he has caught a spy. It is a human hull. The crew is health corps. If we hold them, the core files with the Accord, and the Accord asks why the Ascendancy is arresting medics 150 days before a flare its own clients have on record. Drawl did not answer right away. "Release it," he said, "and tell Captain Rune that the next time he wants to win a war, he will do it with my authorization or not at all." The reprimand that reached Captain Rune was 3 sentences long, and it did not thank him for his initiative. Rune read it once, then he read it again, and then a third time, the way a man reads a thing he cannot make say what he wants it to say. He did not conclude that he had been wrong. He concluded, with the serene certainty of his type, that he was the only officer in the Reach still willing to be decisive, that the rest of them had gone soft, that when the reckoning came, they would all wish they had listened to Rune. He was correct that a reckoning was coming. He was wrong about everything else, which is the way of his kind, and the Reach would hear from him again, and it would not be glad. Meanwhile, the census Drawl had ordered to prove the population calm came back and proved the population calm, because that was what it had been designed to find. 41 million residents across the Reach, 11 million of them on the inner worlds and stations, all present, all accounted for, all going about the ordinary business of a system that had been told nothing. The single anomaly, the one aid station that had refused to sign the safety attestation, was written up, cross-referenced, and filed under administrative irregularity, subclass non-compliance. Because the Ascendancy filed everything in triplicate, the refusal of one human corpsman named Danny Cho now existed in 3 separate archives and mattered in none of them. A clerk on the second world read the entry, found no box that fit a man refusing to lie about 11 million people, and assigned it the code the system used for a broken form. Then she went to lunch. It is a strange thing about large institutions, and it is true of all of them, that they can process a warning without ever once receiving it. The words arrive. They are stamped, sorted, and stored. And the one fact inside the words, the fact that people are going to die, passes through the whole machine without touching a single part of it. Because no office was built to hold that fact, and every office was built to pass it along. On the second world, life had never been better. The yards paid well and paid on time, and the boom had put money in the pockets of people who had never had it, and the markets stayed open late, and the schools were full. A teacher named Ander, who taught the youngest children in a town beneath the northern shipyard tether, spent that week on a lesson about the star, the ordinary amber star their world had circled for 4 billion years. And she told them it was old and steady and safe, because that was what the survey said, and she had no reason on any world to doubt it. One child asked why the sunset had gone so white at the edges lately. Ander told him it was dust from the yards. It was a good answer. It was the answer any of them would have given. And it is the quiet horror at the center of this whole account, the thing that makes it worth telling at all, that on the day a human doctor's countdown passed the 145-day mark, the people it was counting were teaching their children that the sky was safe, and meaning it, and being believed. On the inner ring, the human aid stations did what they had been doing quietly for weeks, which looked, to anyone watching, like nothing at all. Supplies came in on the regular runs and did not all go back out. Water tanks that had been half full stayed full. Crates of shielding film, the thin gray sheeting the Corps used to line a trauma bay, arrived labeled as general medical and were stacked in back rooms and not open. Corpsmen worked double shifts and did not complain, and on their own time they ran a drill they did not explain to the station officers. A drill about moving very many people through a narrow door in very little time. None of it was hidden, exactly. All of it was in plain sight, filed under routine, invisible for the same reason the warning was invisible, because no Ascendancy office was built to notice a hospital getting ready. The humans were not preparing to fight, they were preparing to catch. And the difference between those two things was the one difference the Ascendancy had never once had to learn. Vesk moved his 11th freighter with 140 days left, and then he stopped, because he had run out of hulls he could reroute without a signature he could not forge. 11 empty freighters staged near the inner worlds. He counted the standing room in them the way a fleet surgeon he had never met was counting the standing room in her wards, though neither of them knew the other was counting, and he arrived at the same wall she had. It was not enough. It was a fraction of enough. He sat with that at his desk, under a light that buzzed and that maintenance had promised for a month to fix, and he did the thing careful men do when the arithmetic will not close. He kept the number in front of him and did not look away from it. 140 days now, and counting, and out past the last patrol buoy, at the cold, dark edge of the system, where the survey ships never went, 9 white ships waited in the dark and said nothing, which was the loudest thing anyone in the Reach was doing. The hospital ship was named Meridian, and inside it a woman named Anna Reyes sat in a plain gray room and did arithmetic that would not come out. Fleet Surgeon Reyes commanded 9 ships and 14,000 people, and she commanded them the way you command a thing you love and expect to lose, which is quietly and without wasted motion. She was not a general. She had never fired on anyone. Her entire fleet carried not one weapon heavier than the surgical kind. And that was not an accident of poverty. It was a decision, made long ago by a species that had looked at the galaxy and chosen a lane on purpose. The Health Corps went where the wars had been, not where they were going. It cleaned up, it carried out, and it had learned, over 200 years of being the ones who arrived after, a single doctrine it did not write on any wall because it did not need to. Humans do not leave people behind. Reyes had the honest number in front of her, 11 million on the inner worlds. Her 9 ships could hold, at a hard and ugly maximum, 600,000 souls if she stripped every ward to standing room and turned the cargo holds into cattle cars. 600,000 of 11 million. The arithmetic did not close. It was not close to closing. She sat with that for a long time, saying nothing, which was a thing she did that her staff had learned to read as work. Then she called in the 2 people she trusted most, Dr. Sana Iqbal, who had run the number on the star and been ignored, and a young flight officer she did not yet know she would come to lean on. "Tell me the honest number," Reyes said. Iqbal told her, 200 days at the filing, now 140. Peak flare would last roughly 40 hours. Everything inside the third orbit would take a dose that Vasythar physiology could not survive, and human physiology could, barely, in short exposures, because humans had crawled up out of a world with a savage sun and thin ozone, and had paid for it in cancer, and paid it forward in DNA repair no other client species carried. That was the edge. Not ships, not guns, cells. "So we go in," the young officer said. "Not yet," Reyes said. "If we move now, they arrest us for panicking their yards, and they impound the fleet, and then 11 million people have nobody. We go in when it starts. When it starts, no one will be thinking about permission." She looked at Iqbal. "You were right," she said. Iqbal did not look pleased. "Being right about this is not a thing I wanted," she said. Down in the Meridian's lower bays, Danny Cho, reassigned off the ring station and up to the fleet, was teaching 200 fresh corpsmen how to write a name on a strip of tape so it would not smear in sweat or blood. It was the least glamorous class in the fleet. Reyes walked past it, stopped, watched a minute. She did not interrupt. When Cho finished, she caught his eye and gave him the smallest nod, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the tape did not say better. That night, Reyes wrote her fleet a single order and sent it to every ship. It was 12 words. "We hold at the edge. We go on my mark. Not yet." And the fleet held. Holding was its own kind of work, and it was the hardest work Reyes had ever asked of anyone. It is easy to run toward a fire. Every instinct a good medic has is built to run toward the fire. What Reyes was asking her 14,000 people to do was sit at the cold edge of a dying system, in full view of 11 million people who did not yet know they were dying, and do nothing, on purpose, for as long as the star would let them. She walked the Meridian's decks every day at the same hour, not because the ship needed inspecting, but because 14,000 people needed to see that the woman who had told them to wait was not pacing. She kept her hands still. She kept her voice flat. She asked the same 3 questions on every deck. Are the wards ready? Is the shielding stowed? Is the manifest current? And every day the answers were yes, yes, and yes. And every day she nodded and moved on. And the not moving cost her something she never let anyone see. The young flight officer had a name, and it was Vance. And by the second week of the waiting, she had become the person Reyes talked to when there was no one else she could afford to look uncertain in front of. Fleet surgeon, Vance said one night on the quiet bridge, with the amber star hanging small and false in the forward screen. The crews are asking how we will know. How we will know what? Reyes asked. How we will know it has started, Vance said. In time. Reyes looked at the star a while before she answered. We will know, she said, because it will be the worst thing any of us has ever seen, and then it will get worse than that. That is how we will know. Vance did not ask anything else. She logged the watch and she held her station, and she did not tell the crews what Reyes had said, because some answers are only for the person who has to give the order. In the lower bays, the work never stopped, and the work was ugly and unglamorous, and exactly the kind of thing history forgets to record. They stripped 9 hospital ships down to the frame and rebuilt them as something that could hold more bodies than they were ever meant to hold. They ran the numbers again and again, the way you press on a bruise to see if it still hurts, and the numbers still did not close. 600,000, that was the wall. 9 ships, 14,000 hands. Every ward doubled, and the holds turned to standing room, and the ceiling was 600,000 souls out of 11 million. The engineers knew it. Reyes knew it. Nobody said the other number out loud, the one you got when you subtracted, because saying it did not help, and everyone had already done the subtraction in the dark. Priya Das and her 5 engineers sat in the bad room in the Meridian's belly and attacked the wall the way everyone attacks a wall, head on, trying to make the ships hold more and hold longer. And for now, the wall held them back. They did not have the answer yet. They only had the problem, and a whiteboard the color of old smoke, and the specific stubbornness of people who have decided that a wall is a thing you get through, not a thing you accept. Between drills, the corpsmen did what people do when they are waiting for the worst day of their lives to arrive on a schedule. They played cards in the mess. They wrote letters home that they did not send, because there was nowhere to send them from that would not raise a flag. They slept badly and ate worse, and the coffee aboard the Meridian was, by unanimous and unspoken agreement, the single worst thing the Health Corps had ever inflicted on its own people. They complained about the coffee constantly and with great feeling, and not one of them complained about the waiting, because complaining about the coffee was how they did not complain about the waiting. Reyes let them have it. A fleet that can still argue about coffee is a fleet that has not yet broken, and she needed them unbroken for a while longer yet. Danny Cho ran his tape class twice a day now, and the corpsman who took it did not understand at first why a man would spend an hour on something so small. One of them, a boy of 19 on his first deployment, asked Cho straight out why it mattered how you wrote a name on a strip of tape. Cho did not stop what he was doing. Because when it starts, he said, you will have 90 seconds with each person, and most of them you will never see again. And the tape is the only promise you get to make that someone knew they were here. Write it so it does not smear. Write the name, not the number. The number is for us. The name is for them. The boy did not ask again. He practiced until his letters were clean. There is a thing the Health Corps understood that the Ascendancy, with its 9,000 warships, had never once had cause to learn. It is that a person is not a casualty until you have stopped counting them as a person. and that the whole difference between a rescue and a body recovery is whether anyone bothered to write the name. The Ascendancy counted its losses in line items. The humans counted theirs in names, on tape, in a hand that would not smear. That was the whole of the difference. It was also, though none of them said it that way, the whole of the war. Late on one of those identical nights, when the ship was as quiet as a ship of 14,000 people ever gets, Rhea sat alone in her cabin and opened the one drawer she kept locked. There was not much in it. Some letters she had not answered, a citation she had never framed, and under those a cheap plastic band, cracked and yellowed with age, the kind a hospital snaps around a wrist, with a child's name written on it in ink that had almost faded to nothing. It was 40 years old. It belonged to the first patient she had ever saved, a boy who had lived because a young medic had refused to stop working long after a wiser person would have. She held it for a moment. She did not look at it long. Then she put it back in the drawer and locked the drawer and went to check the wards one more time, because the arithmetic still did not close, and the star was still amber, and there was nothing to do with a night like that except the work. Dr. Sana Iqbal did not sleep either, but she did not walk the decks. She sat in a small dark room with a single screen and watched the star, the real star, the one the survey said was stable, and the one her instruments knew was not. She had a number on that screen, and the number was a countdown, and every day it ticked down by one, and every few days it ticked down by more than one, because the star was accelerating, the way she had said it would, in the order she had said it would. 140 days, then 120, then 100, and a twitch in the data that made her sit forward, because it meant the first of the inner pulses had reached the outer worlds. "Confirm the count," she said to no one, and then she confirmed it herself, twice, because there was no one else awake to do it. She did not call Reyes. There was nothing yet for Reyes to do. She only wrote the new figure in her log, under all the old figures, and she understood, sitting alone in the dark, that somewhere out in the reach the number had already changed, and that the people it had changed for did not know it yet, and would not until it was far too late to matter. Attrition does not announce itself. It arrives as a series of small numbers that each seem survivable. In the outer reach the star kept twitching, and each twitch was larger than the last, and each one killed a few more Vasythar who had the bad luck to be facing it when it came. A survey team, a relay crew, a supply barge caught in the open with its shielding down for maintenance. 4 dead, then 30, then 210 in a single flare pulse that swept a mining platform on the fourth world and left it a silent, humming tomb full of people who had died at their stations without ever knowing why. The reports climbed the chain, and at each level of the chain, an officer did the thing his training had taught him, which was to round the number down and pass it up in language that would not alarm his superior. By the time the count reached drawl, it had been sanded smooth into a phrase. Localized equipment losses, elevated but manageable. Vesk would not let it stay smooth. He went to drawl directly, twice, and each time he brought the raw number, and each time he brought the human report, and each time he said the same thing in the flattest voice he owned. "Over, Marshal. The star is doing exactly what they said it would do, in exactly the order they said it would do it. We are inside the window now. If we start the evacuation today, we save some. If we start it tomorrow, we save fewer. Every day is people." And each time, Drawl did not answer with his own words. He answered with the sovereign's. He had escalated the warning himself, once, to the High Court, more to protect himself than to protect anyone. And the reply had come back in the identical language every escalation received. The Ascendancy does not evacuate on the word of clients. He read it to Vesk the first time. The second time he did not bother to read it. He only slid the message across the black stone table and let Vesk read it himself. And Vesk read those 10 words for the third time in his life and understood that they were not a policy, they were a wall. So Vesk stopped asking Drawl and went back, quietly, to the only thing left to him. He had been pre-positioning transports for weeks, not evacuating. He did not have the authority to evacuate, and he was not a martyr. But a sub-marshal could reroute empty freighters for maintenance staging. And if those freighters happened to stage near the inner worlds, and if their holds happened to be empty and pressurized, that was a coincidence a tribunal could argue about later. He had moved 11 of them before the hulls ran out. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was what a man could do inside a wall without going through it. On the second world, the elders quartered noticed the sun first. It had a color now, faintly, at the edges, a hard white bloom around the amber that had not been there in living memory. People pointed it out to each other on the street. A shopkeeper taped a piece of dark film over her window and said it hurt her eyes. Children were told not to look. And on the meridian, at the cold edge of the system, Rhea stood at a viewport with a cup of bad coffee going cold in her hand and watched the same star through a filter. And she counted, and the count in her private log that had read 17 and then 210 now read 1,400. And she knew, the way you know a tide, that the next figure she wrote would not be in the hundreds or the thousands. "Confirm the count," she said to the officer beside her. He confirmed it. She set the cold coffee down and did not drink it. "Not yet," she said. "Soon." The wall the humans hit was not made of stone. It was made of physics, and physics does not negotiate. Reyes's plan had always been simple in shape and impossible in scale. Bring the ships to the edge of the hot zone, run shuttles in on fast loops, pull people out, carry them to the ships, repeat. The problem was time, and it was tolerance. Even human cells had a limit. A corpsman could work the inner ring for perhaps 90 minutes before the dose became a debt he would pay for the rest of his life. And a shuttle round trip to the third station ring took 2 hours. And the ring held 400,000 people. And there were 3 more rings and 2 more worlds. And the flare was now 60 days out, then 40, then 30. The arithmetic did not close. It had never closed. Reyes had known that from the first night and had told no one, because a leader who says the number is impossible has already lost the room. Instead, she gave the number to the only people who did not respect it. She gave it to the engineers. They worked in a bad room in the Meridian's belly, a converted cargo office with a coffee machine that produced something brown and a whiteboard that had been erased so many times it had gone the color of old smoke. There were 6 of them. They were not geniuses, and history would not remember their names. And that is the point of them. For 3 weeks, they attacked the problem the way everyone attacks a problem, head-on, trying to make the shuttles faster and the shielding thinner and the loops tighter. And for 3 weeks, the number would not move, because they were trying to win a race that could not be won. Then, at 3 in the morning, on a shift nobody wanted, a young engineer named Priya Das stood up from the floor where she had been sitting with her back against the wall and walked to the smoke-colored board and said the sentence that saved the Terran reach. "We have been thinking about this wrong," she said. "We keep trying to bring the people to the hospital. We should bring the hospital to the people." They stopped moving patients. That was the whole of it. And like all real breakthroughs, it sounded, once said, like something they should have seen on the first day. Instead of racing 11 million people out of the hot zone through a straw, they would push the hospital in. Vesk's 11-stage freighters, empty, pressurized, useless as rescue ships because they were too slow to run loops, were perfect as something else. Line their holds with water and scrap metal and the Ascendancy's own abandoned hull plating, and each freighter became a shielded ward that could sit inside the ring and simply endure. Rotate human crews through in 90-minute shifts, 10,000 short exposures instead of 1,000 long ones, spreading the debt across so many bodies that no single body broke. Treat in place, shelter in place. Do not move the patient out of the storm. Move the storm's edge over the patient. It did not require a single new ship. It required looking at the problem sideways at 3 in the morning with bad coffee and a board the color of smoke. They deployed the first shielded freighter quietly, without announcement, tucked against the third station ring under cover of a routine supply run. And that was where the Ascendancy found the thing it could not explain. A Vasythar rescue cutter sent out to recover the bodies from a flare pulse that had swept an outer platform, came around the platform's dark side and found the platform was not dark. Its lights were on, its air was warm, and moving through its corridors, in radiation that had killed every Vasythar aboard within an hour, were human corpsmen in thin suits, unhurried, carrying the wounded to a freighter that had no business being a hospital, writing names on strips of white tape. The cutter's captain reported what he saw, and then reported that he did not understand what he saw. And both halves of that report were true. He had been sent to count the dead. He found someone already saving the living. He did not have a box on his form for that. Then the star opened its mouth. The humans had said 40 hours at peak. They were off by 2. The flare came in the 5th month of Reyes, holding her fleet at the edge. And it came the way the tide comes over a flat beach. Not as a wave you can see and run from, but as a rising that is suddenly around your ankles, and then suddenly at your chest. The outer relays went white and stopped talking. The fourth world's night side lit up like a second dawn. On the meridian, the star filter went from amber to a flat, hard silver that no one on the bridge had ever seen a sun make. And Rhea stood up from her chair and said 2 words into the fleet-wide channel, and every ship heard them, and every ship moved. "Go now," she said. 9 hospital ships and 11 shielded freighters and 400 shuttles crossed the line at once. It was the largest thing the Health Corps had ever done, and it did not look like a fleet action because it was not one. There were no guns. There were no maneuvers. There was only an enormous, ugly, unglamorous rush of white-hulled ships pouring into a place everything told them not to go, running toward the fire instead of away from it, because on the far side of the fire were people, and humans do not leave people behind. Danny Cho was on the first shuttle to the third station ring. He would make the trip 11 times before the day was done, which was 7 trips more than the rotation allowed, and he would carry the difference in his bones for the rest of his life, and he would never once mention it. On the first trip, the ring was calm. On the 4th trip, the ring was screaming. On the 8th trip, a station officer, Vasythar, gray with sickness, tried to stop the loading because he had received no order authorizing an evacuation and could not act without one. And Cho, who had not slept in 30 hours and had written 400 names on tape that morning, looked at him and said the truest thing anyone said all day. "Nobody's coming with your order," he said. "We came without it." Then he went back to loading children onto a freighter that was not supposed to be a hospital. There was one more obstacle in the approach lane, and it was a man. Captain Rune's picket squadron sat directly across the human line into the third ring, and Rune had standing orders and no new ones, and a head still full of the certainty he had been nursing since the day his reprimand arrived. He ordered the interdiction. The human shuttles did not answer, and did not deviate, and did not arm, because they carried nothing to arm with, and they came on at a steady burn like traffic through a gate that happened to have a man standing in it. Rune held his line for 4 hours. That was the Reach hearing from him again, and it was not glad, because 4 hours at the third ring was measured afterward and given a number, and the number was 6,000. In the 5th hour, his own flight crews began opening their bays without waiting for him. One hull and then another. And Rune sat in a command chair nobody was listening to anymore and watched his squadron turn into a hospital around him. He opened his own bays last. He took on 1,100. It went into the record both ways, and the tribunal read it both ways. And the 6,000 stayed 6,000, however it was read. The numbers that day moved faster than the reports could carry them. First flare pulse, 40,000 exposed on the fourth world, half saved, half not, and the not was a number Reyes wrote in her log and then had to stop and sit down for, because 20,000 is not a number. 20,000 is a mining town. It is the sound a station makes when its shift whistle blows, and she had just written it in ink. Second pulse. Third. The freighters held. The corpsmen rotated. 90 minutes and out. 90 minutes and out. 10,000 people spending a piece of their future so that other people could have one at all. And then, with the holds full, the humans walked into the wall they had known was waiting and had never once said out loud. Pulling a body out of a fire is transport. Keeping it alive afterward is medicine. And medicine is species-specific, and the species in those holds was not theirs. Vasythar marrow did not fail the way human marrow failed. It failed faster, and in a different order, and every compound the health core carried by the pallet had been refined over 2 centuries for cells that folded the other way. The first radioprotectant they pushed into a Vasythar dock foreman in the 3rd freighter's bay took his blood pressure through the floor in 90 seconds. The second did nothing at all. The third worked, and worked beautifully, and then killed a woman 2 bays over at the identical dose, because the dose was the whole of the problem. Vasythar body mass ran half again of humans. Vasythar liver analogs cleared the compound at a rate nobody had ever had a reason to measure. There was no chart. There had never been a chart. Nobody writes a chart for a species that has never needed one. So Reyes did the only thing left, which was to stop pretending the humans were the experts in the room. She sent for Crest. They found the old shipyard physician in his lower infirmary with a stockpile he had begun quietly ordering months before and never explained to anyone, crates of it, stacked to the ceiling, and they found his own dose already well past the line where anything could be done about it. He ran the channel from a cot. 11 hours, 2 languages, an old Vasythar doctor who had spent 40 years keeping welders alive, reading metabolic tables aloud, to a human fleet surgeon who had never held a Vasythar liver in her hands. The 2 of them correcting each other in the open, where every corpsman awake in the reach could hear it. What Crest had was the body. What Reyes had was the fleet. Neither of them had ever needed the other before. The protocol they built was ugly and provisional, and it was wrong twice more before it was right. Half dose, watch, adjust. Half dose, watch, adjust. Corpsmen with no pharmacology beyond a field card learned a new figure every 40 minutes and shouted it down the line. And the line shouted it back to be certain, because a misheard number in that bay was a dead person in that bay. Not one of the people lying in those holds ever knew that the medicine keeping them breathing had been invented that morning by 2 doctors who had never met. Crest did not live to see it written down. His name is on it anyway, first, above hers, because Reyes put it there and refused every later request to correct the order. And underneath all of it ran the thing no plan survives, which is that there were simply too many. The Meridian's forward bay was built for 400. It took 1,900. The wards did not fill, they drowned. In the 6th hour, Reyes gave the order every fleet surgeon trains for, and no fleet surgeon believes she will ever have to give. And she gave it flatly, on an open channel, so that nobody under her would have to carry it alone. Sort them, she said. 3 lines. Cho and 200 corpsmen went down the rows with the tape, and the tape stopped being a promise and became a sentence. 1 mark for those who would live if they were treated now. 1 for those who would live if they were made to wait. And a 3rd strip, unmarked, for the ones the fleet could not reach in the hours the star was going to allow it. The unmarked were not abandoned. Somebody sat with each of them and held on and said the name out loud. That was the whole of what the health corps had left to offer, and it offered it because the doctrine never said humans save everyone. It never once said that. It said humans do not leave people behind, and sitting with someone is not leaving. And somewhere in the ascendancy chain, far too late, an order finally moved. Drawl, pulled back at the last hour to a command tender riding in the shadow of the Third World, watching his shipyard cook from the only safe seat in the system. His 60 new hulls glowing on their cradles like coals gave the command he had refused for 200 days. "Evacuate the inner worlds," he said. His adjutant, pale, told him the humans had begun the evacuation 9 hours ago without him. Drawl did not answer right away. He looked at the silver star that had been amber that morning, and he found it looked entirely different than it had. And he understood, in the specific arithmetic of a man who has just seen the size of his mistake, that the order he had finally given was not a rescue. It was a footnote. "Continue," he said, and his voice did a thing it had never done. It shook. "Confirm the count," someone was saying, "on every deck, on every ship." Nobody could. The count would not stop changing. The reckoning did not begin with grief. It began with a form. 9 days after the flare, when the star had gone quiet and sullen, and the last shielded freighter had crawled out of the ring, with its holds full of the living and its manifest full of the dead, the Ascendancy did the thing institutions do after a catastrophe. It commissioned an honest assessment, because the dishonest ones had stopped being useful. The task fell to a review board of 6, and the board did something the Ascendancy had not done in 900 years. It counted, not rounded, counted. They put the true figure on a single screen in a room with no windows, and the 6 of them looked at it, and for a while none of them spoke. Of the 11 million people who had lived on the inner worlds of the Terran Reach, 3,100,000 were dead. It was the worst loss in the history of the Ascendancy. And beside that figure, the board was required by the terms of its own charter to record the counterfactual, the number that answered the only question that mattered: how many of the survivors had been saved by the Health Corps? The board ran it twice because they did not believe it the first time. 7,900,000. The humans had pulled nearly 8 million people out of a fire the Ascendancy had ordered them to ignore, with 9 hospital ships and 11 borrowed freighters, and no weapons at all. The board's chair, an old administrator named Torvald, who had signed the original safety attestation himself, tried to find a way to make the numbers smaller and could not. He tried each of the doors an institution tries, blame the humans for panic, but the humans had saved 8 million. Blame the star, but the humans had predicted the star to the day. Blame equipment, but the equipment had worked. Classify it, but 3,100,000 families already knew. Wait for it to fade, but it would not fade because the survivors were on 40 worlds telling the story, and every telling of it ended the same way, with white ships coming into the fire. One by one, the board tried the options, and one by one, it set them down. And at the end, there was only one door left, and it was the door no one wanted to walk through. Torvald opened the human report, the original one, the one Drawl had filed under review 209 days before, and he read aloud the line the whole Reach now knew, and the room went very still to hear it in that place. "The star will flare within 200 days. Everything inside the third orbit will cook. Move the people now or count them later." Torvald set the report down. "We move nothing," he said, "so we are counting." Before they wrote anything, one of the 6 had opened Submarshal Vesk's private file, the one he had kept locked since the assembly, and found the human report copied into it with the date attached and 3 words written beneath it in his own hand. She was right. Torvald read them twice. He did not enter them into the record because there was no box on any Ascendancy form for a man who had known and had not been able to move, and because he understood, holding the page, that the 3 words were not a defense. They were a confession, and Vesk had written it 200 days before anyone thought to ask him for one. He wrote the board's single recommendation in one sentence, and it was not a punishment, and it was not a defense. It was a request, and it was the most difficult sentence the Ascendancy had written in 9 centuries. "Ask the humans to the table," it read, before the other 39 ask themselves what they are still doing at ours. Draw was not on the board. Draw was in a smaller room, alone, with a screen that still showed the Thren star, amber again now, healed, stable, exactly as it had looked the morning he said no. He looked at it for a long time. Then he asked for a channel to the human fleet, not to command it, to request. It was, one of the officers present said later, the most polite thing the Overmarshal had ever done. And it was 209 days too late. And he knew it, and he did it anyway, because grief does not obey a schedule, and neither, in the end, does shame. The table they finally sat at was on the Meridian, because the humans would not come to a Vasythar deck, and the Ascendancy, for the first time in its history, agreed to go somewhere it had not chosen. The Ascendancy sent Envoy Karn, a smooth and careful man whose entire craft was the removal of costs. And across from him, the Health Corps sent a woman named Miriam Hale, who was not a doctor and not a soldier, but something the humans kept for exactly this, a negotiator who understood that terms outlive the people who signed them. The room was plain, the coffee was bad. There was a stain on the table that no one had cleaned, and both delegations looked at it and neither mentioned it, and the stain did more to set the tone than any speech could have. Karn was generous, that was his method. He conceded, cheerfully, 4 things in the first hour. He conceded the cost of the fleet's fuel and repairs, all of it without argument. He conceded a public commendation for the Health Corps, engraved, permanent. He conceded reparations to the survivors, a figure so large he said it twice to be sure Hale had heard it. And he conceded, with a small, graceful bow, that mistakes had been made in the assessment of the star. 4 concessions, each real, each expensive, each offered with the ease of a man clearing small stones off a path. Then he came to the one thing he had been sent to remove. And here his voice changed. And here is where the story was actually decided. The humans had submitted, along with their bill, a single, non-negotiable clause. They called it the Thren precedent, and it was 4 lines long, and it said that under the accord, no species, client or sovereign, could be ordered to remain in a zone that its own medical authority had formally declared lethal. It said the warning of a healer outranked the schedule of a warlord. It said, in plain and permanent language, that 11 million lives could not be spent to make a deadline. Karn offered Hale a great deal of money to take that clause out. He offered more than the reparations. He explained, reasonably, that the clause insulted the Ascendancy's sovereignty, that it would tie the hands of every future commander, that it set the word of clients above the will of the state. And Hale listened to all of it, politely, and let him finish, and then she declined. Later that night, with the aides gone and the recorders off, Karn asked her the real question, the one men like him always ask in the end. Why this? He said. You have the money, you have the credit, you saved 8 million people, the whole galaxy knows it, you have already won. Why die on 4 lines of language? And Hale, who was tired, told him the truth, which is the only thing negotiators have that warlords do not understand. Because the 8 million are not the point, she said. The 8 million we already saved. This clause is for the ones we could not reach in time, and for the next system, and the one after that. Your Over-Marshal did not lose those 3 million people to a star. He lost them to a sentence. The Ascendancy does not evacuate on the word of clients. I am here to make sure that sentence is never true again. You can take a system by force. You cannot take a system by force from a species that has decided it will always, always come for the people you leave behind. That is not a threat. That is just what we are. Karn did not answer right away. Then he signed. He conceded 4 things cheerfully, and the 5th thing he could not concede at all, so he stopped trying. And in the morning, the Thren precedent went into the accord, and Danny Cho's strip of tape, the one with the name of an old woman who had died of a bad heart on the first day, was entered into the record as the first exhibit, evidence that someone had been counting from the very beginning. Hale kept a copy of the tape. She keeps it still. The consequences did not stay in the Thren reach. That is the thing about a precedent. It is a stone dropped in one system, and it moves water in 40 others. In the year after the flare, the 39 other client species of the Ascendancy read the 4 lines of the Thren precedent and did a quiet arithmetic of their own. None of them rebelled. None of them had to. They simply began, one by one, to route their people's safety through the Health Corps instead of through the Ascendancy's chain, because the Corps had done the one thing the Ascendancy had failed to do. It had come. Trade agreements were rewritten. Basing rights were renegotiated. The Ascendancy, which had not lost a system in 900 years, did not lose one now either. But it lost something it had never thought to count. And there is a word for what happens when a power stops being obeyed, not because it is defied, but because it is no longer trusted. The word is erosion. It is slower than defeat, and it is worse because you cannot see the moment it begins. Sub-Marshal Vesk was promoted. He did not want it. They gave him a medal for the 11 freighters he had staged without authorization, the ones that became the shielded wards. And at the ceremony, the citation praised his initiative, and Vesk stood very straight and said nothing. And when it was over, he went home to the second world and sat with his family under the healed amber sun and did not speak of it for a long time. Being right had cost him nothing and saved him nothing. He had moved 11 ships inside a wall. 8 million people had come out. He did not connect those two facts out loud ever, and no one made him. And Dr. Sana Iqbal, who had run the number on the star, who had written the sentence the whole galaxy now quoted, who had been ignored for 200 days by an empire that could have moved and would not, sat in the Meridian's records office long after the fleet had stood down, and an officer came to tell her, formally on behalf of the Accord, that she had been right. She heard him out. She thanked him. Then she said the thing that is the whole heart of this, the thing that separates the people who prevent catastrophes from the people who are merely proven correct by them. Being right about a bad thing is not the same as winning, she said. I would trade the entire record, all of it, the vindication, the citation, the sentence in the Accord. I would trade it in a heartbeat for one thing. I would trade it to have been wrong. She did not cry when she said it. She had done her crying at 3,100,000. She simply said it and went back to her charts, because there were 4 more frontier stars the Corps had not finished studying, and she meant to be early this time, however little good early had ever done her. Fleet Surgeon Reyes went home too, eventually. Her quarters aboard the Meridian were small and plain and had one drawer she kept locked. And in that drawer, under the citations, in the sealed orders, and the letters from families she could not answer, was a single object that had nothing to do with any of it. A cheap plastic hospital band, cracked with age, with a child's name on it. The first patient she had ever saved, 40 years before. A boy who had lived because a young medic had refused to stop. She took it out sometimes. She did not look at it long. She put it back. That was the whole of the ceremony, and it was enough. Years later, a historian came to the Reach to write the account, because someone always does, and she interviewed all of them, Vesk and Iqbal and Hale and Cho, and the 6 engineers with the smoke-colored board. And she asked each of them the same last question. What was the single decision that changed everything? She expected them to say the flare, or the arithmetic, or the 4 lines in the Accord. Not one of them said any of those. Vesk said it was the freighters. Iqbal said it was the number, and that it hadn't changed anything, which was the tragedy. Hale said it was the 5th clause. And Danny Cho, when she found him, still a corpsman, still writing names on tape, thought about it for a while, and then said the decision that changed everything was made 200 days before the fire, long before any of theirs, in a room he had never seen, by a man who read a warning and set it down. The historian wrote that down. Then she asked Cho the things she had been saving, whether, knowing the cost, he would do it all again. And Cho gave her the answer that is the closing of this account, the answer that was never really about the ascendancy or the star at all. Of course, he said. He said it the way you say a fact, not a boast. Nobody celebrated any of it, and there were reasons, 3,100,000 specific reasons. And the survivors did not throw parades, they went to funerals. And the Corps did not call it a victory, because a victory is a thing you win, and this was only a thing you survive. But the precedent held, and it holds now, on 40 worlds, in 4 lines that outlived the man who made them necessary. The Empire had ignored the warning. The Empire had been certain the humans were bluffing. And when the fire came for the people the Empire had condemned, the humans came too, without an order, without a weapon, without a schedule. Because that is the one thing about them that never translated into any briefing. They do not leave people behind.